Good morning, everybody. I'd like to start off with an apology. I spent the last 4 weeks putting this testimony together, and I don't have a single Lord of the Rings reference for you. Sorry, Dan. I do, however, have a poem reference. When I was in 7th grade, we had to memorize the poem, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. And the last line of that poem is, I took the one less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. Little did I know at that time, but that would be the epitome for my life going forward, because up to that point, I had a relatively normal childhood. My parents divorced when I was very young, and my dad took custody of my sister and I. He worked really hard to provide for us, and he did a great job. We had a home and a cul-de-sac, food on the table, friends nearby. But he worked a lot, and so he would rely on family members to help out, to fill those gaps. And part of that was my grandmother taking us to church on Sundays. So she would pick my sister and I up and drop us off. And I don't remember the body of the church, but I do remember the building. I can close my eyes and see the sanctuary. I remember walking down the hallways to Sunday school. But the most vivid memory that I have of those Sundays was that Sundays was laundry day. And when I got home, there would be a huge pile of towels waiting for me to fold. And I cried every Sunday. My dad can attest to that. When I was 10 or so, my dad remarried, and my stepmom had 4 daughters. And so our family dynamic changed what felt like pretty drastically. There was new rules, new regulations to follow. I remember that we tried a few churches out, but at that point I was seeing my mom every other weekend, and so nothing was really consistent for me. My stepsister in particular had an interest in Christianity, and we tried a couple youth groups out, and also went to a couple Christian bookstores, but I was uncomfortable because I felt like the youth group would lure you in with cool activities and fun things to do, but then make you talk about Jesus, and I didn't know a lot about that. I was really uncomfortable. I'll take the activities, but you can hold Jesus, please. I don't know the exact timing of who moved out when, but I was the youngest, and so all of my siblings were either of age or were living at home, kind of doing their own thing, but the spotlight was on me. And everything I did, I felt, was scrutinized. I was getting in trouble frequently because I was doing things I shouldn't be doing, or I was slipping in school, or not doing my chores, things like that. And so to cope, I would call my mom and have a conversation with her. And that was welcomed with open arms because my mom wanted to be the good parent. She wanted to be the good guy of the story. And so eventually, when I was in 8th grade, I made the decision to move in with my mom. And little did I know at that time, but I was rejecting a life of structure and rules. I was rejecting that narrow gate, and I was going to become a meal ticket. My mom was abusing prescription painkillers at the time, and it didn't start off so bad. She would get them from doctors, regular prescriptions, but those run out, and the addiction stays there. So she would purchase them from people in our neighborhood, and she would use me as the mule to go get those medications and transfer the money and the product. If it wasn't available locally, she would go to emergency rooms and pretend to be injured to get medications. And when the hospitals catch on to that, she used me to do the same thing. I remember one night in particular, we went to 3 different hospitals, and a result of that was eventually me getting kicked off my dad's health insurance. But I got what I wanted. I was free to essentially do whatever I wanted to do. I had no supervision. There were sometimes she would be gone for days at a time, and leaving me down to the last cans of food. But again, I could do whatever I wanted. So the result of that was, by the time I was about halfway through 10th grade, I was totally failing school, sexually active, smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, just no future whatsoever. When I was 17, I was asked to knowingly return stolen goods. Her and her group of friends, if you want to call them that, would go to big box stores and steal large dollar items and then return them to other stores, and I refused to do this. That was about the time that I caught her using heroin as well. And so I had to make a decision. Is this the life that I want, or do I make the right choice? Do I pick the narrow gate for once? And so with the help of my dad and stepmom, I collected my things, reported the activities to the police, and pursued becoming an emancipated minor. So when you become emancipated, you legally release your guardians of any legal obligation they have to take care of you. You become an adult before you turn 18. So my first court hearing was going to be an attempted bash against my mom. She had burned bridges with everybody in our family, so everybody was on my side. And they wrote letters about the horrible situation that I was put in and things like that. But emancipation was not about the situation you were in, but it was, can you be a functioning member of society as an adult, of which I was absolutely not prepared for. I had dropped out of high school. I had no job. I had no place to stay officially. And so that first court hearing, the judge just chewed me out. I had nothing. But I was given a little bit of grace. I was given 5 weeks and a list of things that I needed to take care of. And so in that 5 weeks, I was able to get my first full-time job. I signed a lease with my aunt in her house. And I took the general education development courses, the GED courses, for my high school equivalency. And on January 5th of 2010, I was granted my emancipation. I could sue or be sued. I was an adult. But again, the decisions that I had made up to that point, I really wasn't an adult. I didn't know what I was doing. This only scratches the surface of the things that I went through as a kid, but my relationship with God at that point was zero. I fully rejected the idea of God because why would a God put me through that, let alone anybody else in the world, of the horrific things that happen? And so I went on with life for the next 14 years. I was going to do things my way, the way that I wanted, because I had built it and only me. And obviously that's not the right way to look at things, but that's how I felt at the time. So for the next 14 years, I lived your average godless life. I was an average secular guy, drinking almost every day, using profanity, engulfed in pornography, everything that the world has to offer. The one good thing that came out of all of it is I got to marry my high school sweetheart, who was in a very similar situation and grew up in the same neighborhood that I did, so experienced a lot of the same things. We purchased our home here in Marysville in 2019, and Grayson, our middle child, was almost 2 at the time, and Megan, my wife, was looking for preschools for Grayson to attend, and came across Praise and Promise here at Mountain View. I shut it down. My kid's not going to go learn a fairy tale. That's how I thought. And that's how I thought until April 20th of 2024, when I was sitting at home scrolling through Instagram, as one does, and came across a video that opened with, do you know what the most studied artifact is in the entire world? And at that time, through those 14 years, I was a facilities engineer, I was a Volkswagen mechanic, so I like to work with my hands, tangible things in the real world that I could see, that I could touch, that I could prove. And so the Shroud of Turin is a burial cloth depicting the image of a crucified man with injuries consistent of those with the crucifixion in the Bible. So for the first time ever, I thought, is Jesus real? Like, is this a real thing? So it's not a fairy tale. So I texted my coworker Nick, who joins us here today. And I asked his thoughts. What do you know about the Shroud of Turin? And he said, it's some old cloth wrapped around Jesus after he died. It's probably not true. But he continued. He said, Jesus was a real man, but also 100% God. He lived, died, and was resurrected, and is alive now. So this was the first time that I heard the message. I had heard it through my life, but I heard it for the first time. So that night, I went down a rabbit hole on Instagram, as much as I could, to learn about the Shroud and about the resurrection. In the Shroud, I learned that scientists can't recreate it today, that there's no pigment in it, and it's been carbon dated back to the Middle Ages, and then to the beginning where Jesus, in the early years of Jesus. I came across people like Lee Strobel, who was a legal editor for the Chicago Tribune, and Wesley Huff, who was a Christian Canadian apologist. They brought all the receipts for the resurrection in legal documentation with Lee Strobel and with manuscripts and artifacts that was a tangible thing to Jesus. And so the next day, at work, I spent about an hour speaking with Nick about what I had learned. And by the end of the conversation, he suggested that I start reading the Gospels just to learn about Jesus and who he actually was. And so I started with Matthew. And I have a long commute to work. I work in Seattle, and so I have plenty of time to listen. And so by the second day, I had finished Matthew, and I was pulling into my garage. The family was outside. And I went inside momentarily to put my items down. and I was alone. So I sat in our living room in our rocking chair, and I said, God, if you're real, give me something. I need a sign to continue this journey. And I sat in silence, and nothing happened. Nothing happened until Grayson walked in with his Nintendo Switch controllers, which is a small handheld gaming device. The controllers are no bigger than a pack of gum. Without saying anything, he walked straight up to me, put them in my face in a cross, and said, look, a crucifix. This was so unprompted, it blew my mind. I have chills just thinking about it. I couldn't believe it. He didn't know I was reading the Bible. My own wife didn't know I was reading the Bible. The only person that knew was my coworker, and he doesn't know Grayson very well. So I texted him. I was like, you're not going to believe what just happened. This is insane. And he sent me a scripture, John 6:44. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up on the last day. I was being drawn 2 times in my own house, once through an Instagram and once through my own son, who I had rejected going to a church to learn. So I spent the rest of that week listening to the Gospels, and for that weekend I watched The Passion of the Christ for the first time. It was something I had not seen. And because I had a long commute going into work, I would write notes down to talk about the next day with Nick over coffee. And I wrote things down like Adam and others having children at 800 to 900 years old. God limits age to 122, but the oldest person ever was 122 plus 168 days. And the daughters of Lot lay with their father but become pregnant. What are we into? At that point, I had felt confident that God was real, but I was totally disoriented by what I was reading. Until 1 month and 1 day later, on May 21st, it all clicked. I texted Nick. So there's a peace offering, a sin offering, a guilt offering, or a wave offering, all based on what you could afford, whether it was a bull, a lamb, a turtle dove, nonetheless, all requiring a sacrifice to be forgiven. Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice for our sins, and by that alone, he fulfilled the laws. That's the day I believe I was saved. Even after being openly rejected, I was still pursued, and I did nothing to deserve it. So I continued to listen to the Bible app during my commute, and I'd have conversations with my coworker every day. But he would really emphasize, hey, there's a place that you can go on Sundays to have this conversation. My church in Bellevue. And we live up here in Marysville, so that's pretty far. So I asked him and his pastor if they could find a church here in Marysville or close by. And they gave me a few, but none of them really seemed to fit. So I literally just Googled church near me. And I'm just a few blocks away here. And Mountain View popped up. It was one of the first choices. And so I checked out the website. I read the statement of faith and attended in person for the first time in October of 2024. And I came a few services alone. My family was on a different journey than I was, but I had shared with my wife all the research that I had done, all of the tangible evidence for Jesus Christ, and that it wasn't a fairy tale. Not that she believed that, and she has her own faith story, but for me, that's what it was. So I came to a couple services by myself. She joined me for a few with the family, and then we missed a couple in November for a trip to Hawaii, and then, of course, everybody got sick back-to-back, so we missed a couple services. But while we were gone, Caleb reached out directly and said, hey, we really missed the boys in Sunday school. Hope everything's okay. And how can I pray for you? And that was the first time that I heard anybody say that for me. I'm sure a bunch of people had at that point, people that I knew, coworkers and things like that. But he asked me directly. And then a week or so later, Dan reached out and said, hey, it's been really cool seeing you in church. We should grab coffee sometime. I was feeling drawn to Mountain View. And again, I'd have these conversations with Megan, like, this is what I believe based on the research that I've done, based on what I'm reading. And I think we should continue going. But at that point, we weren't 100% sold, I would say. It's something that felt right to do, but I was fairly new. I still am fairly new to faith. But we were feeling drawn to Mountain View. And the service that Dan gave on January 5th of this year sealed the deal for everything. The sermon that day was on Acts chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. It was, why do we go to church? the 5 undisputed facts about the resurrection. I'm confident this service was from the Holy Spirit through Dan directly to Megan and I. It validated every single point that we were talking about over the last few months. Everything. And so we were being drawn, but we didn't want to just go to church. We wanted to be the church. We wanted to be a part of this and not just attend on Sundays. And so for me, it was a snowball effect. First attending the men's breakfast, which is once a month. Matthew's doing the next one. Join it. It's going to be awesome. Joined Rick Hart to do some building repairs because that's what I do for a living and that's what I like to do. And also, as a result of that, signed up for the usher and greeter team. And 566 days after opening the Bible app for the first time, I stand before you today, a host of a small group, a celebration singer, where I get to, where I get to share the wonders of God's work into music, and a baptized member of this church. The poem was, I took the road less traveled by, but he took the road less traveled by, and that's what's made all the difference. Thanks be to God.